The photograph seems ordinary at first glance. Two sisters, Eleanor and Grace Whitford, seated side by side on a wooden chair, their white lace dresses crisp and unblemished. Behind them, a painted backdrop of a peaceful countryside. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. The year was 1897, a time when portraits were treasures, single moments captured forever in silver and light. Families posed stiffly, afraid to blink, knowing the process was delicate and expensive, yet this photograph feels wrong. At first, you can't tell why. The lighting, the angle, the way Grace's hand rests on Eleanor's shoulder, too tight, too still. Or maybe it's the eyes. Yes, the eyes, Grace's eyes, they don't look at you. They look through you. One slightly off-center, the other too sharp, as if she's aware of something behind the lens, something no one else could see. When this portrait resurfaced in 1963, tucked inside a decaying photo album at an abandoned estate sale, the collector thought it was a beautiful relic of the Victorian age. But when he placed it under the restoration lamp, he noticed something odd, the faint shimmer of movement. At first, he blamed the flicker on the glass, but as he leaned closer, Grace's expression had changed. Her lips, once pressed in a soft smile, now seemed to curve, just slightly, upward, too wide. Her pupils are darker, almost liquid, and then right there in the corner of the frame, something that looked like a shadowed hand resting on her shoulder, a hand that wasn't there before. Experts said it was a trick of light, a chemical decay from old emulsion. But the collector swore at the photograph, breathed, and that was only the beginning. The screen fades to black. Only the faint crackle of static remains. Then a voice, calm, deliberate, and cold as midnight. You're watching Truth Uncaged, where every image has a heartbeat and every whisper comes from the past. The photograph reappears, the 1897 portrait of Eleanor and Grace Whitford, but this time, the image seems different. The colors have deepened, shadows stretch longer than before. Grace's eyes, once dull, now glint faintly, as if she's aware she's being watched. Tonight, the narrator continues, you'll see why this single portrait, taken over a century ago, was hidden from the world. Why every photographer who's tried to study it has refused to keep it overnight. A low hum rises beneath the voice, the sound of an old camera shutter winding slowly, click by click. Before we go further, the voice says softly, I want you to do something. Look closely at the image on your screen. Don't blink. Don't look away. What do you see in her eyes? A pause. The silence vibrates thick and electric. Tell me in the comments below, because by the end of this story, your answer may change. The sound of a distant heartbeat joins the static. Slow, irregular, and then a whisper, so faint it barely cuts through the silence. She's still looking. The photo fades once more, replaced by the flicker of an old lantern in a darkened room. Let's go back, the voice murmurs, to where this all began, in a quiet English town that history tried to forget. It was the winter of 1897, the kind of winter that swallows sound. In the English countryside, just beyond the moors of North Yorkshire, stood the forgotten village of Braywick. No rail lines, no maps, and after the turn of the century, no record it ever existed at all. Braywick was small, barely 50 people. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's footsteps, and secrets could only hide until nightfall. The cobblestone streets were narrow and damp. The fog hung so heavy it seemed to breathe. Even the church bell, cracked and uneven, rang only once a week, as if it feared what might answer back. The Whitford family lived at the edge of the village in a stone cottage overlooking the marsh. Their father, Edgar Whitford, was a physician, though many whispered his patients were not always alive when he treated them. Their mother, Agnes, had fallen ill months before the portrait was taken. And then there were the daughters, Eleanor, age 17, quiet and composed, and Grace, only 12, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. When a traveling photographer arrived from London, offering portraits for a shilling, the Whitfords were among the first to agree. Braywick had never seen such a device up close. The wooden camera, the bright magnesium flash, the eerie command to stay perfectly still. But as the flash went off, Villagers said the air around the house seemed to collapse, as though something had been pulled out of it. The birds scattered, the dog howled, and for a moment Grace didn't blink. Some said it was just the camera's long exposure. Others claimed the girl was staring at something behind the photographer. But that was only the beginning. Weeks passed after the portrait was taken. Life in Braywick continued, or at least it tried to, but something about the Whitford house began to change. At night, neighbors swore they heard soft laughter echoing from inside. Not the warm laughter of a family, but a faint, stuttering giggle always from the same corner room, the one with the window that never opened. Sometimes a light would flicker there. Other times, a shadow would pass the curtains when no one was supposed to be awake. When the photograph was finally delivered, it was larger than usual, printed on thick paper, carefully mounted in an ornate wooden frame. At first glance, it was beautiful. The sisters stood side by side, their posture perfect, their dresses crisp. Eleanor's hand rested gently on Grace's shoulder. Their faces were calm, peaceful. But then, people noticed something strange. Eleanor's reflection in the glass was clear and natural. Grace's wasn't. When held under light, her eyes seemed to glint differently. Not with reflection, but with depth, as though the image were layered. Alive. Some even claimed that if you stared too long, her pupils shifted. The photographer, when asked, denied everything. He insisted it was a trick of exposure, a side effect of the new silver nitrate formula he was testing. But he refused to take the photo back, no matter how much the Whitfords offered. That night, Eleanor woke up screaming. She said she saw her sister standing by the bed, smiling the same unnatural smile from the portrait. Only this time her eyes were open wider, far wider than before. And from that moment on, the photo was never left uncovered again. But even beneath a sheet of cloth, some claimed they could still feel it watching. The man who took the portrait was named Alaric Venn, a reclusive photographer known across England for his eerie ability to make his subjects look too real. His studio in London had burned down 2 years earlier under mysterious circumstances, and every photograph he'd taken before the fire was said to have been destroyed. Yet somehow, he arrived in Braywick that winter with new equipment, new chemicals, and a journal he kept locked at all times. No one knew why he'd chosen such a small, isolated town. No one asked. But after the Whitford portrait, something changed in him. Villagers recalled how Alaric stopped speaking to anyone. He left the inn before dawn, carrying his heavy camera case and whispering to himself as he walked toward the moors. Days later, the local reverend reported seeing him digging at the edge of the cemetery, though when he returned with others to confront him, the ground was perfectly smooth. Meanwhile, the Whitford family began to unravel. Agnes Whitford's illness worsened. Eleanor became withdrawn, refusing to enter the room where the portrait hung. And Grace, the girl whose smile now haunted the photo, began to speak in her sleep. According to Eleanor's diary, which was later found sealed behind the fireplace, Grace's whispers were not her own. She spoke of the man behind the flash, and of a shadow that stayed when the light was gone. When Alaric Venn finally vanished from Braywick, the villagers assumed he'd moved on to another commission. But one thing was found in his abandoned room at the inn, a small glass plate negative. It showed the Whitford sisters standing exactly as before. Except this time, there was a third figure standing between them, a shape with no face. No eyes, only the faint outline of a hand, resting gently on Grace's shoulder. And that was the moment the story stopped being about a photograph and became something else entirely. The negative was sent to Dr. Harold Mercer, a photography expert in London who specialized in early exposure techniques. He'd seen hundreds of damaged plates, light leaks, double images, even chemical burns, but this was different. Under magnification, the figure between the sisters wasn't an artifact or smudge. It had depth, texture, and a faint human symmetry, as if it had once been there and simply refused to fade. When Mercer examined the area around Grace's shoulder, he noticed something worse, the imprint of fingers pressing slightly into her dress. The pressure distorted the fabric in a way that couldn't be explained by lighting or exposure. He wrote in his report, "There is movement within the stillness, and it's not from the living." When word of the finding reached Braywick, the villagers panicked. The Whitford family sealed the photograph behind glass and hid it inside a wooden chest. But it was too late. Strange things had already begun to happen in the house. Eleanor claimed she could hear a faint clicking noise at night, the same sound the camera made when Alaric Venn took their picture. Agnes, weak and delirious, told the local priest she could see her late husband's reflection in mirrors that hadn't been polished in months. And Grace had stopped speaking altogether. She would sit for hours facing the covered photograph, humming an unfamiliar tune, low, steady, and cold. When Dr. Mercer requested the original photo for further study, the family agreed. But the courier who came to collect it never made it to London. His carriage was found overturned along the forest road, the chest split open, the photo missing. All that remained was a shard of glass, wedged in the wood, covered with a faint handprint, small, like that of a child. From that night onward, no one ever entered the Whitford home again. And yet, according to reports from travelers passing through Braywick, a faint light still flickers in the window, the same window where the portrait was once hung. By the spring of 1898, the town of Braywick was dying. One by one, families began to leave, their homes boarded up, their windows shattered by storms that seemed to linger only above the village. Those who stayed behind spoke of whispers in the night, a voice that sounded like a young girl, calling softly from the marshes. Then one cold morning, a group of farmers found something half buried in the mud near the old churchyard. A photograph, worn and soaked but unmistakable. It was the portrait of the Whitford sisters, yet the image was no longer the same. Eleanor's face had faded, her outline almost erased by decay. But Grace, the younger sister, was perfectly preserved. Her expression sharper now, her eyes wider, her mouth caught mid-smile, almost like she had just begun to move. The farmers handed the photograph to the constable, but by nightfall the image was gone again. The glass frame remained, but the paper inside had turned pure black. That same week, the Reverend of Braywick recorded something chilling in the parish logs. He wrote, "A child's footsteps were heard outside my window. No one there, but when I looked out, I saw her, the younger Whitford girl, standing at the end of the lane, barefoot, her dress soaked." The same dress from the photograph. He left the village 2 days later and never returned. In the years that followed, Grace Whitford became a myth, a warning whispered to children. They said if you stared too long into an old photo, she'd appear behind you. Others claimed to hear the faint click of a camera before mirrors shattered in empty houses. But one fact remained buried until much later. When the ruins of the Whitford home were finally excavated in 1953, investigators found a small metal plate under the floorboards, engraved with Alaric Venn's initials and one final line, "Subject successfully transferred." Whatever Grace had become, it seemed Alaric's experiment had worked. For decades, the Whitford story was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale whispered by villagers who couldn't let go of the past. Braywick itself was erased from official maps by 1910, its name replaced by farmland and silence. But then, more than a century later, the photograph resurfaced. In 2004, a collector in London purchased a box of antique negatives from an estate sale. Inside was a single envelope marked BW 1897. When developed, it revealed the Whitford sisters again. Though not quite as before, the image appeared alive, flickering subtly when viewed under certain light. The collector claimed that whenever he turned away, the figures seemed to have shifted slightly, Grace's eyes following him across the room. He documented everything in a short journal, but his entries ended abruptly after this line. "She smiled again today. I swear I heard the shutter." The photo was later recovered from his flat, the man himself never found. Experts at the Royal Photographic Society tried to analyze the print, but their scans failed repeatedly. Each attempt produced the same glitch, two bright eyes appearing in the black margins of the image, blinking once before the file corrupted completely. To this day, the photograph is sealed in a controlled vault under the name the Whitford exposure. Only 3 researchers are allowed near it. 2 have since withdrawn from the project, citing psychological interference. The 3rd refuses to speak publicly, though she once told a journalist that she heard a child's laugh echo through the soundproof lab. Braywick, now nothing but an overgrown ruin, remains fenced off by the local council. But travelers who pass at night report a faint amber glow from beneath the soil, like the flash of an old camera bulb. Still waiting to fire again, because even now, 28 years later, Grace Whitford is still watching. They say every photograph captures more than an image. It traps a moment, a breath, a trace of something that refuses to leave. But in the case of Grace Whitford, it may have captured something else entirely. A fragment of consciousness, a soul suspended between light and shadow. Historians still argue over what really happened in Braywick. Was Alaric Venn a genius ahead of his time, or a man who crossed into something he was never meant to touch? Did Grace die that winter, or did she simply remain inside the glass waiting to be seen again? What's certain is this: every copy of the Whitford portrait tells the same story. The ink never fades, the paper never yellows, and no matter where it's displayed, the eyes of the younger sister always seem to find you first. Collectors whisper that if you stare long enough, you'll hear it, the faint click of a shutter behind you, followed by a breath that isn't yours. Those who do rarely talk about it afterward, but perhaps the real horror isn't the ghost in the photograph. It's the reminder of how easily curiosity turns into obsession, how we stare too long at the darkness trying to understand it, never realizing that sometimes it stares back. The story of Grace Whitford isn't about death. It's about the moment after, the place where memory refuses to die and where the past keeps developing frame by frame. So, before this video ends, look once more at the image on your screen. Not too long, just enough to wonder if somewhere beyond the glass, she's wondering about you too. The screen fades to black. The faint hum of static returns. Then, a single flash, white, blinding, and the portrait appears again. The same image, the same sisters. But this time something has changed. Eleanor's face, completely gone. Only a blur where her outline used to be. Grace remains, sharper than ever. Her eyes are bright, almost reflective, like polished glass catching candlelight. And then, she blinks. The narrator's voice lowers, trembling with quiet unease. Some stories are never meant to be told. Some memories were buried for a reason. If you found this photograph unsettling, you're not alone. Many before you have tried to forget it. Few have succeeded. The old record crackles again. A faint melody hums beneath the static. The same eerie tune Grace was said to have sung in her sleep. It plays slower now, softer, almost inviting. Before we end tonight's story, the voice continues, take one last look. The original portrait of the Whitford sisters has been missing since 2004. But replicas have surfaced online. Some say they change if you stare long enough. If you ever come across one, a pause. The heartbeat returns louder than before. Don't look into her eyes. Not for more than 3 seconds, because that's how long it takes for the flash to capture you. The screen flickers once more. The faint outline of a third figure begins to form behind Grace, the same faceless shape from the old negative. And then, silence. A whisper cuts through the darkness. Barely audible, almost a breath, smile. The video ends. But the reflection on your screen stays just a moment too long.